and click on that video so you can know how to access the starter, which we're about to change. So here's the starter down here. Now on the starter there are two wires, one's a positive and one's a ground. So the first one up here on top, what we're going to do is peel back the rubber on top, and you'll see it exposes a 12mm nut on top. Second wire right here, all you got to do is pull it up from the rubber. If you take a look at it, it's kind of just like a speaker connector wire that you just pull up on it and it disconnects. A lot of people are familiar with these because they put aftermarket speakers in their car and whatnot. Now that we see how those come apart, let's go ahead and get our 12 and start undoing the first nut on top of the starter. So we take that all the way off, and then we can take off the harness, which is part of the engine harness. Remove that, stick it down below, get it out of our way. Now we're going to grab our 6-inch extension, our ratchet, and a 14-inch socket. There are two things we got to take out. We got to break these bolts on the starter. So one is down here. We're going to point to it with the screwdriver. Hopefully you can see that well in the video. So we're going to take that one out first. These bolts might be tight, so you might have to work on breaking them, applying a little harder pressure than normal. Now there's another one back here. You can't see it in the video yet, but once we take it out, we'll show you how to do that. On the first bolt, don't take that one out all the way. As you see, we left it in there. So you just want to break it, loosen it up, get it out enough, but don't pull it out yet. So here we go, undoing the back. And once this is out, you'll see where that's located. And if you're replacing your starter, you probably already see the hole for it on your new one. And we're going to go ahead and finish the rest of it up by hand. That way we're more careful not to drop it. Have a little more control on it. And this is what it looks like. It's the longer of the two bolts. The top one is actually shorter, which we'll show you later. So now we're going to go ahead and take the top one out all the way. The reason we did it in that order is because if we took the bottom one out, or the top one out all the way first, and then we were doing the bottom one, the starter would be shaking, moving around, and it sometimes makes the bolt hard to remove. It gets stuck in there because the starter's moving around while you're trying to take it out. Okay, so you can see how these bolts look. One is short, one is long. If you forget or mix them up, come back and look at this video and you can see which is which. So here's the starter off the car, what it looks like. Here's a little overview of what we took out. We got the two bolts, the one in the back, the one in the front, and then we got the two wires off of the top. So 4 things in total. Now we're going to show you how to put it back on. So we're going to go ahead and just put the starter back in, line up the holes where they originally were, where the bolts go. We're going to put the shorter one back in on top first. So we're going to thread it by hand to begin with. Then we'll switch over to our tool. Alright, now do the back one the same way we did the front one. Start by hand and then use the tool. Remember, right will tighten it up, left will loosen it. We're going to take our ratchet fully assembled and go ahead and do a last run over these bolts. Make sure we tighten them up really nice and tight here. As always, there are torque specs with any bolts, even these. And if you're that concerned about them, you can get a torque wrench and torque it down. But this is the most common way it's done and the most accessible way. People usually don't have a torque wrench, so we're just showing you how to do it the most common way. So let's get these wires, swing them back over onto the starter. We're going to start with the top one first. You see a groove cut out in the plastic here. So go ahead and place it according to that groove. Put it down over on top of the thread, get the nut, and start tightening it back down. And remember, this is a 12, size 12. Alright, make sure to get that nice and snug. We're going to go ahead and put the rubber cap back on top of it. And then we're going to work on the second one. Go ahead and slide it back onto the tab it came off. Get the rubber on top of that as well. Here we'll use our screwdriver to make sure it's nice and flush. And there's that. And if you notice any hoses or lines that you took out, maybe moved out of the way like we did here to make it easier to access the starter, don't forget to put those back into place. Alright, onto the resonator, putting that back on. So go ahead and slide it under these hoses, connect it back to the intake box. As you can see by the circular tube where it connects. So go ahead and press that in. Make sure it goes in nice and good. Go ahead and check that the holes are all lined up so we can put our bolts back on. Take note of this tube here. You see the battery cable naturally will go under it once you put it back on. But you need to slide the battery cable back on top of the tube. It's also indicated by this clip on top, which will connect to the hole on top of this tube. So we'll go ahead and pop that in right away. So now we're going to get our 10s and go ahead and put them in on all of the holes that we took them out of. And you want to put them in by hand first. Don't tighten them up all the way. That way you don't bind one side down and you only to find that one of the other holes are off, and then you got to go back and undo it to align the holes again. So we're going to go ahead and do them all by hand before we tighten them up. And that concept applies to almost anything, especially rims. As you've seen, the starter we did, just about anything that has multiple bolts. As you can see, the last one here, giving us a little trouble. Sometimes they can be a pain with all the stuff in the way. But as you can see, we'll get it on here in a moment. Okay, so there's a fuel line here, and it goes into the groove on the resonator. Go ahead and make sure to pop that right back into place. And now after we assemble our extension with a 10 on it, here comes the easier part. We're going to go ahead and tighten all of those bolts down. Alright, now we're going to get our battery, which is the final step. Put this back in. Don't forget to put the positive towards the red cable and the negative towards the black ground. Don't put it in backwards or something very bad will happen. So go ahead and plop this down. Make sure that cover is around it. Don't forget that cover. People do forget them a lot of times. Then they have to buy them. But we just kept it on with the battery. And what you're about to see is what happens quite often, a little struggle trying to put the battery back in, or you could even apply to other parts. You got to move it around, make sure things line up correctly, make sure the wire is able to reach where it needs to go. You know, sometimes you might think you're putting it on wrong, but it's just a little struggle, and you have to just position it correctly. So here we go, we got that on. We're gonna go ahead and get our 10, tie the nut back onto it. And pop that cover, slap it down back over. And as you can see, the other cable is kind of buried down there. We'll just pull it back up. Go ahead, snap that on, tighten it down just like we did on the positive side. And this one doesn't have a cover. Next, we're going to move on to the battery tie down. You see this L-shaped hook, which we're going to put under the cable, not over it. And if you can see on the camera, it needs to go down and under the bracket down below. It might be hard for you sometimes to see, sometimes to get that in. So you might have to use another hand down there. We'll show you what we mean here. Alright, so you see how it went in down there. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but hopefully you get the idea here. Alright, so now moving on to the other end of this tie down. Align it with the hole on the radiator support. Go ahead and get that bolt and put it back down with our 10. And that's it. That's the final step. And that's how we change the resonator and the starter.